and it's wonderful being back with our friends out here in Hollis Hills. It's been too long. I felt that because of the crisis that we've suffered as a Jewish people over the last 2 weeks, and I've gotten so many calls from communities and students to reflect and to process with them, I said to myself, I better be in touch with Asaf and Elazar and come back to the community here and process with you. And the truth of the matter is, every time and every place I go, when it comes to this, I don't prepare. I just say, I have to speak to where I'm at that moment. And the emotions have just been all over the place. And the truth is, I often ask myself, as I'm sure all of you do, is how do we get through our days? I've stopped looking at the news. I've stopped checking videos. And I only rely on word of mouth from my friends and chaverim that are in the know in Eretz Yisrael. And like so many, I have a son in the IDF right now. His name is Hananel. He's a Duvdevan. He was called up. He's finished the army 7 years ago, but he was called up. I have 2 nephews and 2 nieces that are serving in the army. I have countless Talmidim, students, and children of very close friends of mine. And so it's real for us in this situation. And I don't have to tell you that this past week we put to rest so many, young and old, of our people. And the Mishnah says, Kol ha'me'abed nefesh achat mi'Yisrael ki'ilu ibed olam maleh. One who takes a Jewish life, it's as if they've taken an entire world. And we have lost many, many entire worlds these last 2 weeks. I've recited so much Tehillim from the moment these stories became real to me, because the truth of the matter is, when I first started hearing things in Beit Knesset, believe it or not, on Shemini Atzeret, I said can't be. And then came back Simchat Torah, and people were affirming, and I was saying, Hashem Yirachem. And we had no Simchat Torah in my Beit Knesset. I don't know what other shuls did. We just did hakafot to the minimum, and that was our Simchat Torah. But as news started coming out on Monday and Tuesday, I kept saying, this is fake news. The horrors that were coming out, I couldn't believe were true. And when we find out that they are true, it's just jarring and shocking. And the truth of the matter is, we as a people are familiar with this. Our liturgy and our tefillot are full of prayers and tefillot for these kinds of sufferings and situations. But what makes this different is that it's in our own homeland, in Eretz Israel. Throughout the last 2,000 years, 2,200 years, we've suffered so much, but it was always in a foreign land. And the fact that it was in Eretz Israel had me thinking in a way that I want to share with you a little bit. And I'm cognizant of the fact that we have young boys here in the room. We say in our Tehillim, Mima makim keraticha Adonai. David HaMelech is calling out the Ribono Shel Olam. And many of the Tehillim are expressed with such anguish, with such pain, with such suffering. And this past week, I'm saying to myself, to write these words, you can't just imagine them. You have to be feeling the pain and the suffering. What event in David HaMelech's life inspired that kind of suffering? He was king. He came from a wealthy family in Yehuda. Ben Porat Yosef, he had 10 brothers, all of them Giborei Chayim. Okay, he had problems with Shaul HaMelech. It's problems of brothers. He ran, he had mercy on Shaul HaMelech. Problems. It's not the suffering and the pain that elicits the words of the Tehillim that we read. He had problems with Avshalom, with his son. Yes, that was tragic. But David HaMelech in Tehillim speaks of an enemy that wants to destroy me, wants to kill me, an enemy that is horrible. His son Avshalom was his son at the end of the day. The tragedy of the story, we're not going to get into it, is horrible. There's one event in David HaMelech's life that when it occurred to me this past week, it changed where I am at in a radical, dramatic way. You know what I'm talking about, Professor? Which event? No? So listen to this carefully. Before David HaMelech becomes king of Israel, he is what you would call a mercenary. He had men under him, and he fought battles for warlords.
Freelance.
A mercenary, a freelancer. And he was under the auspices of the Melech of Kiryat Gat in the south of Israel. And he was a paid, right, exactly, warrior for hire. And he sent out on a mission. I don't want you to miss this, Asaf. Oh. He sent out on a mission for 2.5, 3 days to go fight one of these battles. And listen to what happens. Vahi bevo David va'anashav Tziklag. David returns home after a successful military excursion. Va'amaleki pashtu el hanegev ve'el Tziklag, and the Amalekim and the Pilishtim, while he was away in battle, they came and they attacked his village, Tziklag. Vayaku et Tziklag They killed many in the village of Tziklag. Vayisrefu ota ba'esh, and they burned it down to the ground. Vayishbu et hanashim asher ba mikaton ve'ad gadol, and they took hostage the women, the children, and the elderly. V'lo imitu ish, they didn't kill them; they took him hostage. Vayinhagu vayilchu ledarkam, and they took them to their own city. Vayavo David v'anashav el ha'ir. David returns with his men to the city. V'hinei srufa ba'esh. He sees the city is burnt down completely. Unshehem uvneihem uvnotehem nishbe'u. And their wives, their sons, and their daughters are taken hostage. Vayisa David ve'a'am asher ito et kolam vayivku. David HaMelech raises his voice and he cries, Ad asher ein bahem koach livkot. They cried so much, they had no more strength in them to cry. For us, that was until last Thursday, maybe Friday, last Shabbat. How much tears have we all shed? But look what happens next. V'teitze leDavid me'od. The crying turned into anger and into rage. Ki amru ha'am lisoklo ki mara nefesh kol ha'am ish al banav ve'al benotav. People were angry at David HaMelech. You're our leader. We left these women and children defenseless. What happens? Vayitchazek David b'Hashem. David HaMelech turns that sadness into strength. But it's Vayitchazek David b'Hashem. It's a strength that emerges and that comes about from Hashem, from emunah in Hashem. David turns to the Kohen Gadol and he says, Hagishan Ali ha'ephod, bring me the ephod. Vayigashev yatar et ha'ephod el David, that's the Urim v'Tumim. And David asks, should I go find my wives, the women, the boys and the children, the girls? And they say yes. And the Torah, the Navi tells us, David HaMelech follows them and finds them in a valley. V'hinei netushim al pnei kol haaretz. They're spread out in this entire valley. Ochlim v'shotim v'chogigim b'chol hashalal hagadol. The enemy is celebrating. They're celebrating the crimes they committed. They're celebrating the hostages they took. Asher lakhu me'eretz Yehuda. What does David HaMelech do? Does not hesitate. And the Navi tells us, him and his men went in there and cleaned them all out. Wiped them all out. Not one was left. And he saved all the hostages, including his wives, Avigail Eshet Naval Carmelit and Achinoam HaIsraelit, his two wives. And he brought them home. And for me, this tells me that's the place where I'm at now. this has become a war, a battle for the soul of the Jewish people. The enemy knew these crimes aren't going to scare us away. They knew that. But what they wanted to do was put a knife in our spirit and in our soul. But they forget one thing. Elu barechev, ve'elu basusim, v'anachnu b'shem Hashem. They come with their chariots, and they come with their tanks, and they come with their craziness. But we have Hashem on our side. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ki lo itosh Hashem nachalato. What's the pasuk? Ki lo itosh Adonai amo v'nachalato lo ya'azor. Moshe Rabbeinu made the promise that Hashem will never abandon the Jewish people. Ever. Chagai HaNavi says, just like Hashem is eternal, the Jewish people will be eternal. At the end of the Akedat Yitzchak, when Avraham Avinu is prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice to the Ribbono Shel Olam, Hashem says, Bi nishbati, Neum Hashem. Hashem, this is unique in all of Tanakh, doesn't appear anywhere else, where the Ribbono Shel Olam makes a vow on himself. Binishbati. It's as if Hashem is saying, I take a vow on myself. There's no parallel pasuk in the entire Tanakh. Maybe Professor will correct me. I don't think there exists. Correct? Does not exist a parallel to that. Let me just see if I can find the pasuk exactly. Kiyan Vayomer, Hashem says, Bi nishbati neum Hashem, Kiyan asher asita et hadavar hazeh, velo chasachta et bincha et yechidecha. Because you did not withhold your son, your only son. Hashem says, Bi nishbati neum Hashem. I take a vow that I will stand by your descendants, your progeny, your children, the Jewish people, forever. And that, my friends, is a vow and a promise that history has shown to be true. I once asked a Rav of mine, a teacher of mine, name was Professor Chacham Jose Yosef Faur. And I asked him, this was shortly before he passed away, I went to see him in Latanya, and I said to him, Chacham, what is the greatest miracle of civilization that humanity has ever seen? And I'm thinking he's going to tell me Kriyat Yam Suf, he's going to tell me the Aseret Makot. Maybe even he says to me, the Ma'amad Har Sinai. He says, no. The greatest miracle is that the Jewish people are still here. We are still here. Every other civilization is gone. But Am Yisrael, we are here. And we are witness to the great miracle of the 21st century. of the 20th century, the state of Israel. Medinat Israel. It's unbelievable. So, I want to just study with you a few halachot in Harambam. We can't have an evening like this without opening Harambam. And then I'm just going to share thoughts. I know the young boys have to go home and sleep. Hopefully they did their homework. Harambam says the following. In Hilchot Ta'aniyot, I want to study two halachot with you. It says, Mitzvat aseh min haTorah liz'ok uleharia b'chatzotzrot al kol tzara shetavo al hatzibur. There's a specific mitzvah to call out to God, to the Ribono Shel Olam, when a tragedy occurs, when a horrible crisis like this takes place. Now, of course, we know there's a tefillah to pray every day, correct? And Harambam, according to Harambam, that's a mitzvah de oraita. One has to pray every day to Hashem. But there's an additional mitzvah to call out to the Ribono Shel Olam. Liz'ok ule'ariya. Ze'aka is with your voice, and le'ariya is with the chatzotzrot, with the trumpets. To call out to the Ribono Shel Olam when a tzara, when a crisis, when something horrible happens to our people. And then Harambam says, V'davar zeh midarkei hateshuvah. Calling out to God when crisis occurs has to be accompanied with self-reflection, with an examination of ourselves, an examination of our families, an examination of our community, an examination of our nation. שבזמן שתבוא צרה ויזעקו עליה ויריעו ידעו הכל שבגלל מעשיהם הרעים הורע להם. These things don't just happen. And we are no one to pinpoint a finger, God forbid, at what specific. But our calling out, our tefillot, our tehillim, evenings that we gather for chizuk have to be associated with self-reflection and with teshuvah. And Harambam adds, Aval im lo yiz'aku velo yariu ela yomru davar ze miminhag ha'olam ira lanu. If one does not turn to the Ribono Shel Olam when a crisis like this happens, it's politics. It's international political geopolitics. That's what this is. Nothing more. Harambam says, Harei zu derech achzariyut. This is cruelty. V'goremet lahem leidabek b'maaseim. And it causes one to remain in this false reality, in the sense that it just happens. And there's no just happened. And if anything, history has shown us enough times that it's Yad HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we have to turn to the Ribono Shel Olam. I want to share with you one Ma'amar Chazal that's been on my mind. Chazal, our Chachamenu Zichronam Livracha, want to understand how it was possible that Shaul HaMelech, the first king of Israel, Shaul, who had mercy on Amalek. You remember the story. That was his downfall. The Navi tells us Shaul was big and strong, and he commanded so much leadership. And when he called the Jewish people to war, they all followed him. And he had one mitzvah to fulfill. Mechiyat Amalek. The destruction of Amalek. I don't understand it. My students ask me all the time. Not once, not twice, 5 times a year. How could the Torah command the wiping out of a people? Rambam addresses it. My teachers, Rabbi Soloveitchik, wrote about it and explained it. There are plenty of explanations. Shaul HaMelech also struggled with it. He said, okay, I'll kill all the combatants. I'll wipe out the enemy. But how about, those that are not here or there? And he let them live. You know the story. He showed Rachmanut. What?
Old man.
Yes. And Shmuel HaNavi says to him, because of this, you have lost the ability to be the future king. Here's a man, Shaul, who had so much compassion in him. Our Chachamim question, how is it possible that not a few years later, Shaul HaMelech kills the Kohanim of Ir Nov? 80 Kohanim in the city of Nov, Shaul HaMelech massacred. And Chazal tell us the formula. And this formula is very applicable to us today. Kol hamirachem al ha'achzari, sofo liot achzari al hamirachem. Those who show compassion on the cruel, on the evil, will ultimately be cruel and show cruelty on the compassion. And our mission now, and trust me when I tell you it's a nes gadol, that America and elements in the world are supporting us right now. And we can't take that for granted, because tomorrow it could change like that. And I hope and pray, and believe me, I'm a very compassionate person. Very compassionate person, as every one of us are. But I hope and pray that we destroy that evil element that's in our backyard in Eretz Israel. There is no place for that element anymore in this world. And Hashem has made that our purpose as a nation, as a people. And to hear my son and his friends, who I know very well, part of the Duvdevan unit, say, Abba, never again will this happen to us. There is a resolve today amongst our young men and women, because they are seeing firsthand the horrors of what could happen. And there's a resolve today finish that off and to wipe that out. And so Be'ezrat Hashem, we should have that koach. We should have that strength. And I know be'emunah shelema that we will come through this stronger and better and this is the time for us, my friends. I can't say this enough. To strengthen our bonds with Eretz Yisrael, to add another half an hour of Torah study in our week. To say to yourself, I'm going to add a few minutes to my Shabbat instead of waiting till exactly candle lighting. Oh, little Tosefet Shabbat. I'm going to increase my tzedakot just a little bit more this year. Because all of this has to be about personal self-reflection and bringing us closer to the Ribono Shel Olam, bringing us closer to Am Yisrael, and creating an achdut, a love for one another, above and beyond more than we could imagine. Remembering and reminding ourselves that we are all family. We might disagree, but we're one people. I'll close with this thought. What do we say? What do we have in our tefillin? Anybody know what do we put in the tefillin? Shema Yisrael, what? Yeah, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Correct? Our tefillin is an affirmation of Yichudo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The unity, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Davav, asks a crazy question. And when I was young, I never understood it. The Gemara asks, so what does Hashem put in his tefillin? Now, of course, my Talmidim know Hashem doesn't wear tefillin. It's just an image. It's an idea. The Gemara wants us to think about the answer. So the Gemara answers, in Hashem's tefillin it says, Mi ke'amcha Yisrael, who is like your nation Israel, Goy Echad Ba'aretz, one singular nation. We affirm Hashem's Yichud, we affirm the unity of Hashem. Hashem reaffirms our unity. And that's how we have to live. We have to live united with one another. Thank you all for being here. Do we have minyan for Arvit? Did you guys pray Arvit yet?
Yeah, I prayed.